Angela, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Boomer. It's great to be here.
I've had a pleasure of really just exchanging conversations with you over the past couple of weeks, and I know we have different industry backgrounds, but similar stories in a way. And so, if I have this correct and my research is correct, you worked in corporate law, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I did.
Okay, so when we start talking about law on this show or uh, banking, finance, etc., I would love to hear just sort of what that was like for you, the type of environment, because there's a lot of people listening to the show that probably are in corporate law, and just sort of the environment and what eventually led you to leaving corporate law. But let's first start with how you got into it and what that environment looked like for you.
Yeah, so the environment was, busy, 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 right? It was very, very long hours and very high demands. I was working on one of the biggest law firms in London on multinational deals. And it was, how did I get into it? It was the excitement. It's funny,
Mhm.
actually, I was originally going to be when I was doing my training, I first of all wanted to be a defamation lawyer. And that
Mhm.
was exciting in the litigation. And then my final seat was corporate law. And I don't know, there was something sexy about corporate law, if you if you can term
Yeah.
it like that, I guess. And it was fun, and I enjoyed the buzz and the kind of the cut and the thrust of it, and putting the deals together, and also just around the people. They're really high energy lawyers. They work hard and play hard, so it was a lot of fun. And then I think for me, what it meant was it becomes a lifestyle. That's the only way I can describe law. It just is all encompassing. And I think I enjoyed it for many years, when I was in my 20s, and all my friends were lawyers, and we had a great time, really enjoyed the deals. And then I actually moved in house for a bit. I was on a secondment to an investment bank. So I
Hmm.
think you were
Oh,
saying you were in banking. So I went
yeah.
there. So yeah, out of the saucepan into the fire. And
Hmm.
that again was different. It was fun. I was working with the trading floor, but initially, actually, the hours were a little bit better, and I was thinking, well, this looks quite good. The in-house game. Perhaps that's what I'll do. But then, actually, very quickly, it just turned into more of the same, and it got
Hmm.
to the point where I felt it was overtaking my life. And I think, as women do, they want to try and combine what they're doing with a family. And so then, at that point, I looked at, well, actually, I think private practice is for me. I wanted to make partnership. It was like a goal of mine that I'd had. But I moved to a larger firm that had a London base, but was based outside, predominantly outside of London, just to see if I could kind of combine and marry those two worlds, which in the city I didn't see many women doing, or at least they weren't seeing their family if they were. And so I then sort of made partnership when I was 8 months pregnant, crazily.
Wow.
And it was a busy year. Yeah, it was a busy year. And the thing is, I think I then took a career break. Initially, that's what it was, because I had both of my two boys very close
Hmm.
together. So I think actually I was 3 months pregnant when I was due to go back from maternity leave. So that was all quite fast. And I thought, well, actually, I'm going to take some time out. I spoke with headhunters and things. Does it matter if you take? And they were like, anything up to sort of 18 months is probably fine. And then as I came away from law, I kind of had my own battles, which we can get into if you want to,
Hmm.
in terms
Yeah.
of burnout and postnatal depression. And I ultimately then it led to a very big life change in me and a complete switch in the end.
So I want to just unpack some of this for people to kind of set the background because, some people aren't necessarily familiar with what long hours means, right? And so they may think that anything greater than an 8 hour day. I'm just curious because I know what London can be like in terms of
Mm.
the attitudes towards work hours. I also know what multinational deals can be like. Uh, uh, what would you say sort of an average day looked like in terms of working hours or average week, if you will?
So an average week would be mostly 12 to 14 hour days
Hmm.
and up. I think that often weekends included, there
Yeah.
was always the hospital pass, particularly when I was more junior, that get thrown on your desk at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon.
Oh, I
And
love those.
yeah, you knew that was a whole weekend of work, right?
Hmm.
So sometimes, I'd be waiting for things with, the team, the secretary and people to turn things around, and we'd go out, come back to work, and then work through. I think, I've done some crazy things like 3 a.m. workouts in the gym, waiting
Oh, I
for the
remember
the
those.
overnight. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
They don't feel good. I think you only try that a few times, but it's a
Yeah.
way of staying awake, I guess.
Hmm.
So for me, I think the worst stint I ever did was actually when I was working on the merger of Hewlett Packard with Compaq Computers, and
Oh.
that was between California, London, and India, and that was crazy. And I think we did something like 85 hours with an hour and a half sleep, and that was literally just to kind of nap and then came back. And what I found was the floor didn't even stay still at that
Hmm.
point. By the
Yeah.
end of that, when I came through the other side of that, I just felt like I'd almost gone into a coma.
Hmm.
I was so exhausted. So yeah, the hours were very long, very demanding. And it's funny because I think I still occasionally have a dream today where I wake up and I feel like I haven't charged enough chargeable hours.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
definitely a pressure as a lawyer.
So billable hours are certainly a thing to consider here. Now, along the way, I'm just curious because when you get into a position like that and you start to do more than what your body is really built for, what are you using to compensate if you're willing to share? Because I know for me, for instance, like I was a big caffeine user, for
Mm.
sure, until I figured out what nootropics were. But I was not necessarily using the nootropics in the right way. But for you, were there particular things that you would turn to, or did you find sort of the magic bullet through exercise?
Exercise. So
Oh, really?
this obviously, I knew nothing at this point of biohacking, nootropics, anything like that. So as a lawyer, I was pretty healthy, but I was exercising, I would say, probably too much. And I think that almost then even further warmed up the stage for the burnout that was to
Yeah.
come. Because so hit workouts, definitely I would, we as lawyers, we never really got started until about 9:30, 10. So it was always late nights. And so I've always been that early morning chronotype. So I
Hmm.
would classically be up at 6 a.m., either running into work or cycling, then going to the gym and, kind of pumping myself up. Caffeine a little bit. I never really overused. I used it definitely for sure. And I guess it was too much um, for my adrenal function in a way, but I don't think that I was surviving on coffee at night. I certainly was during the day, but I used exercise for the extra pump. And
Yeah.
like I was saying, working out at 2 a.m., crazy kind of things.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think in my 20s, I think you get away with it. That's the
Yeah,
thing
in your
for a
20s you
long
do,
time.
right? It's just like
Mm,
maybe and look, work hard, play hard, right? Like maybe at that point I would get worse hangovers or something, but that was really about it. What were some of the sort of cracks in the armor, if you will, that you started to see
yeah.
before you took the 18-month sabbatical?
So that's a great question. So for me, what took a hit was and this is ultimately what and led to my demise I got repeated respiratory infections. So
Hmm.
I'd always had a background of that as growing up as a teenager. And the question came later, um, after I'd had pneumonia, did I always have asthma and it was undiagnosed? Or why was I getting these affections? Was I just pushing? Because even when I wasn't pushing myself that hard, like at school, I was getting these, but that definitely what kept happening. So it was repeated chest infections and laryngitis every time I pushed myself. Then I would have a bit of time off, recover, come back, and then just push again. And that kept happening. And they progressively got worse. So, initially and the problem with that is, as you know, is it leads to courses of antibiotics because you need them
Hmm.
to cure it. And so and then it sort of moved into maybe a bit more higher grade infections, things like bronchitis and pleurisy,
Hmm.
until eventually then eventually was hospitalized with pneumonia.
Wow. Wow.
Mm.
And so when you went and had your two boys, you decided to take some time off, and that was really when when you sort of took a little bit of a break, you started to realize what was under the surface was going on. And you mentioned something earlier around both burnout, but also depression. And I would love to go into that if you're willing to share.
Sure, sure, sure.
So with I mean, we can choose the path you want to go down. Did one lead to the other, or was it more sort of a combination of the two?
So that's interesting. I think that having now done the research and everything myself and really dived into this, I think that I was exhausted by the time that I had my children.
Hmm.
And that really made me a lot more vulnerable to the postnatal depression. But I also think part of it was the attitude that had become a part of me, really, in terms of never feeling like I couldn't do anything. I took too much on. So, for example, like we had this thing at the law firm where it was always grace under fire. So, no matter what challenge was presented, you had to be able to cope with it, and that was part of being able to become a partner, right? You had to demonstrate that resilience.
Hmm.
So when I had my children, I remember the midwives and the people that would visit saying, you've just got to take a step back and get some sleep. And I was like, no, I've done all nighters. It doesn't matter. And I was continuing on and not taking naps and not actually really giving my body a rest. But I think I was kind of fighting, I would say the depression, they came together. I was fighting this secret battle. And at first I really wasn't willing to accept that I had postnatal depression. That was something that was never going to happen to me. I
Hmm.
didn't identify with it. So for me, and I think this is true for a lot of people, depression is very, very physical
Hmm.
and it comes as exhaustion. And so I was looking at other things first of all. It was like, well, I must have iron deficiency, right? I've had that before. So that could be what it is this time. That's why I can't get out of bed. Um, and it's taken a long way for me as somebody who felt so in control of their mind to really explore and dig deep and do that work to actually come through the other side of it. So I think they probably both came together and each one exacerbated the other.
Hmm. We haven't really, we talked quite a bit on this show about anxiety, a little bit less on depression. Um, how common is postnatal depression? And then, uh, if you don't mind just going through some of what that felt like for people.
Sure. So I think it's very common. I think what differentiates it is the degree to which you have it. So I think for some women, and I think it's kind of trying to understand the difference between your hormones are all over the place,
Hmm.
100%. When you've just had a baby, they're all over the place. And then it's understanding, is this a short-term thing that actually I'm going to get past? So obviously the first thing is the baby blues, which are very very extreme. You're very tearful, and that happens kind of day 3, 4 when sort of the milk comes in. It's that's very unique, and that passes for most people. Some women then do struggle with that new adaptation, the new life, and they can experience depression. Um, with me, it became more and more entrenched over time, and
Hmm.
so it then I was diagnosed with clinical depression that was chronic depressive disorder and potentially tripping into bipolar.
Mm.
So whether that, and if I look back in all honesty, I did struggle. I think I've always struggled my whole life, but I don't think I ever identified it as depression.
Hmm.
So for me, it's hard to distinguish whether it was just postnatal or that was an event that triggered it and brought it on.
Hmm.
Because the more I've learned and the more I understand now how it works and what those thoughts are and how to cope with them, the more I can identify that some of these things were there long before I had children.
Hmm. And what did some of those thoughts look like? I obviously want to hear the back end of the story, which because you made a lot of progress here.
Mm.
But what did some of those that day to day look like when you were going through the postnatal depression?
So the first thing that happened for me when I was experiencing it, and it was the same each time, is an inability to sleep. So an
Hmm.
inability to settle my mind. And it was almost like a kind of computer scrambling program. There was just heightened activity in my mind. Um, And that then would be followed with, I guess, very negative thought patterns, and very feeling. But there was, and I think this is the hardest thing. I don't know if there are women listening that may identify with this. The hardest part for me was there was a degree of self-loathing that came with it, or a degree of feeling that in some way I would be freeing people if I wasn't there, freeing my children, which it sounds crazy for me, and to listen to that, to listen to myself saying it now, but it becomes so painful to exist, so painful to be with your own company and your own thoughts, that you ultimately just, I found, for me, I can't speak for other people, I just wanted to turn them off. And that's when, I think that's when it starts to be, the suicidal thoughts become more prevalent. And I know that people can feel depressed or down without getting to that stage. So there may be, for different people, it may be different and varying degrees. But certainly for me, it then turned into something where I just wanted to turn my head off. In the morning, I couldn't get going. So as I had it repeat, and it becomes more entrenched. So it was triggered each time once I'd had a baby. And I adored my children, don't get me wrong. I completely fell in love with those babies the moment they were born. And I feel so fortunate for that, because I think some women can't connect with their babies. And I feel genuinely heartfelt emotion for those women, because I think that must make it even harder. For me, that wasn't the issue. I felt that somehow I shouldn't be here, and it used to take my eldest, a good hour and a half to get mummy out of bed in the morning, and just of arm pulling, and it was so physical. I didn't know what time it was most of the time, whether it was night or day. If the sun shone, most people get a serotonin boost when the sun's shining, they feel happy, it makes them smile. Every day is dark cloud in your head, and then it takes on a very physical form as well.
Thank you for sharing that. It's I really appreciate you being so open about it. At some point you entered into sort of the pattern interrupt though. And what made you say like, hey, I got to do something about this? And how did you begin that process?
So the first time, I didn't get any help after my first child, and then
Hmm.
I went straight into the pregnancy, which was quite quick, with my second, and I felt really quite depressed all the way through that pregnancy, and it was a struggle. And then when my son was born, they talk often with postnatal that there's kind of a trigger point around 8 weeks, and again at 8 months, and that was definitely how it kind of struck for me. And when my second child was 8 months old, my husband took some time off, and I then had somebody to sort of take care of the kids. So this need to actually get out of bed. My husband was like you in finance. He is an investment banker. And so he
Hmm.
was working long hours. He wasn't there. So I felt very alone. And he took a week off, and I just could not get out of bed. So
Hmm.
I, at this point, still was in total denial and believed I knew what was going on, but I didn't want to. So I thought there must be something wrong. So I called my doctor and said, I think we need to run some bloods. I can't get dressed till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is not me. I think maybe I'm anemic again. And she obviously had seen it repeated times and said, look, we'll run some tests, but I just want to put it out there. Could be what it is. And then the test came back fine. So I then ignored it until I got to the point where I think I was struggling with my own thoughts so much that I went to see a GP that I was closer to, and he just somehow had a way of talking to me that I could trust. I think that's the biggest thing. And I didn't want any medication. I just wanted to speak to somebody.
Hmm.
And he sort of left the room because I was answering a series of questionnaires, which is what they get to do initially. And I was trying to answer them. I wasn't being honest with them. So he left the room and came back. And then he said to me, the reason I left is I just knew you were never going to be honest. There was always going to be a brave face if I was in the room.
Hmm.
And then I was kind of shaking, and he pleaded with me and said, can I please, will you let me treat you? And I just, at this point, it was just so physical. I was like this. I couldn't even hold myself.
Hmm.
uh, just the pain inside was so great. And so I agreed really reluctantly at that point to take some medication. So the doctor was sort of pleading with me, and I was shaking. He was like, please, can I help you? And I was like, I don't want any medication. And he was like, even if you utilize this to help you get back on track. So I took the medication, and then it worked a little bit. Then I had a big crash a couple of months later around Christmas time. And then they needed to increase the dose. And I then went to see a series of psychotherapists. I had various ones over the years to really help me. And I started to do a lot of work on myself. So understanding that my thoughts were not me. I'd never made that distinction before, right? I just thought my thoughts were me. I wasn't a meditator at this point. It was life in the fast lane. That was the thing. That's everything I'd done up until that point, was just go, 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 then crash and burn on a holiday, come back and start again. And so I was trying to unpack my thoughts, and the medication, I think, just allowed me to do that work. And ultimately, that time I got back on track. My doctor was reluctant, actually, because it had taken time. I hadn't had to have specialist care at this point, for me to have another child, because he felt that, and this is obviously true, that the lack of sleep was having a big part, and that if I had another child, the hormonal impact and the lack of sleep that came with it, because all of mine had really terrible reflux as babies, and they really didn't sleep, and so I wasn't getting much sleep. So he kind of said to me, if you really, I knew I wanted another child. And I'm the sort of person who's generally, when I'm like I am normally, so positive, that I was just like, it's not going to happen again. I've dealt with it now. It's gone. And so he was like, well, at least get a maternity nurse to make sure that you are having sleep. So I then basically decided, and well, it's not unfortunate, this is good news, but I fell pregnant with my daughter very quickly after that process. And that pregnancy was amazing. I felt I felt very bad morning sickness, but I didn't feel any kind of depression. I was really happy. I got a maternity nurse to help me afterwards, and I thought everything's going to be fine. That third time was just too much. It happened way faster. I do think there's a hormonal basis for this, because it triggered every time of the birth of my child. But this time I fell so hard and so fast, and it took way, way more than ever before to come back. So I needed medication. The medications they'd used before didn't work. They then tried different medications. I did all of the therapy again. It was a big dark hole. And eventually, I then got referred to the Priory Hospital under the care of a psychiatrist who was helping me, and he was transitioning me onto other medication. I was on medication morning and night, on pretty strong bipolar medication, which was making me exhausted and very sort of spaced out. And in that transition process, this was about 2 years on, when my youngest was now 2, we went to have some time away, just down to Cornwall as a family. My kids got a cough. They were pretty poorly with it. It was like a flu. And my husband got it, and I seemed okay. But in my mind all the time, as they were changing medications, you experience even greater depression again, because there's withdrawals and things. And I just was having these suicidal thoughts again. So it was well beyond postnatal by this point, because it was 2 years on. And basically, I then did become sick with it, obviously with the background of respiratory infections. And then this infection just started to take hold. And initially then I was diagnosed with pneumonia, and they ran some chest x-rays, and they discovered that things didn't look great on the x-ray. So they were trying to work out whether to keep me at home or to treat me in the hospital, but they thought I had something called bronchiectasis. So I was referred to a consultant who called me and said, can you come to the hospital urgently? I need to see you today. So I went to the hospital, and he kept talking about lymph glands and saying to me, and I was like, what's this bronchiectasis? And he was like, I'll get to that. Can you see your lymph glands? They're so big there. And I was having these raging fevers. So I knew I was ill, and they'd said I had pneumonia. I was on antibiotics, and had about 3 different courses. Nothing was working. And I said to him, why do we keep talking about my lymph glands? Like, I've got pneumonia. Like, why do we keep talking about this? And I said, it's like you think I've got lung cancer or something. And then he just sort of paused, and he was like, well, it's hard to say that you haven't. We need to, without a CT scan. So I was like, whoa, like, how does this happen? I'm not a smoker. Like, what is going on? Fortunately, it was in a private hospital. The CT scan was done then and there. And I kind of walked back into his office and he was like, it's worse than I thought. And I was like, wow, like life is just changing so fast. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, what do you mean it's worse than I thought? You know, have I got lung cancer? And he said, no, but you have got viral and bacterial pneumonia, and it's now all over both lungs, and that's why your lymph glands are so big. So we're going to have to transfer you now to the general hospital by ambulance because you may need to even be intubated.
Wow.
And it was just all happening so fast, and I was like, whoa. And I said, I basically refused and said, I can't sleep at home. I've got 3 young children. Please, can you just let me stay here for a few days in the private hospital? So he
Mm-hmm.
agreed to make arrangements on the basis that they would see how things went, because it just was taking hold so fast, they weren't sure. And then I think my body at that point just started to give up, right? I was just, the moment I was then in bed, I could rest. And they took some bloods and they said, you're neutropenic. We're really going to just rely on antibiotics here because your white blood cell count is so low. And I was on oxygen and nebulizers and all these things. I was on a
Wow.
drip. And it was all tumbling so fast. And it was ironic because I had wanted so much to end my life. And then it seemed like things were going that way. And I think when you have a really high fever, and this is really what got me, it was the entry point into meditation. I think you kind of almost become quite lucid when
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking. And that was just a segue. And I felt this tremendous sense of peace. And I was thinking, and the self-loathing just fell away. It was just me, there I was. I tried to run away from myself, and wherever I went, there I was. And now I was in hospital and I couldn't run anywhere because I'm in bed. So I had to be with just me. And it was like a magical moment. It sounds really woo-woo, but I just thought, I really want to be a part of my children's lives. I
Mm-hmm.
really want to see them grow up, and I really want to be there. I want to be a mum to them. And this is the thing about health, right? Is the mind and body connection. Within 24 hours of me making that decision, or 48 hours, my blood started to change. My white
Mm-hmm.
blood cell count improved. My immune system got stronger, and the antibiotics started to work. And I was saved ever having to have that extra intubation. It was like amazing. And then that changed my life. When I came out of hospital, I was like, right, I'm going to find out how to be healthy. Like, this is it. And
Mm-hmm.
initially it was just a journey for me. How can I get really, really healthy, mind and body, the two? I knew they had to be both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah.
And so that journey, because, first off, thank you again for sharing everything. That's incredible what you've been through and how you've gone through it. Now, you leave the hospital, and at this point, you're like, hey, I want to get healthy. If I plug the word health into Google right now, I'm going to get 10,000 different opinions,
Mm.
as you know. Where did you start? And take us through just sort of how that journey arrived at you now helping people.
So the first thing I think was when I got home was thinking, I've really got to take charge of my mind. I've got to like do this work. And I was transitioning onto these medications, which actually then began to work. They were strong. I was tired,
Hmm.
but I was getting a more stable mood. So I really dived deep into, first of all, looking mentally, like, and doing the homework, like when I would see a therapist, like how your thoughts become things. So what does that thought mean? And what are automatic thoughts? And is there a different point of view? So I would really work hard on my mind. And on at the first point there was mindfulness. I found meditation difficult, and then I transitioned from there to meditation.
Hmm.
Um, I then I went to see a functional medicine doctor. I'd lost a ton of weight. I didn't have loads of weight to lose, and he was like, "You will have lost so much bacteria. You've had so much antibiotics." So we were working. I got onto some adaptogenic herbs, which
Hmm.
just helped me, really, really helped me. Some different supplements to support me, and then just started to try. I didn't have a massive appetite to eat as nutritiously as I could. I was going back then, the hospital, I was due 6 weeks later to go and see what the damage was to my lungs. And then unfortunately, I got another chest infection, so they couldn't do that. So I then had another set of antibiotics, but this time it wasn't so bad. It was manageable.
Hmm.
And I think as often is the way, when you try to get back up, you kind of get beaten down first.
Yeah.
And then you get back up again, right? Just
Hmm.
keep getting back up.
3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And then the first thing I did was I started Googling, as you say, well, how can I get healthy? And then the first thing I came across, the first course I ever did was with the Institute of Integrative Nutrition.
Hmm.
And that just blew my mind, because I remember watching Joshua Rosenthal, the founder of that organization, talking about things that had never occurred to me, like when you're cooking food, put love in it, because the energy is being transferred to the food. And I was suddenly like marrying the two, that it was, there I was still separating everything, putting an effort into my mind separately with the psychotherapists and the treatment plan. And then I was basically working on eating really nutritious food. And then I started to get into this whole world of energy, and like how the physical could affect the non-physical, and how those two worlds came together. And was just reading and reading and reading lots of books, did that course. I was like, wow, there was so much. I remember at the end, the last module I think was delivered by Deepak Chopra, and his
Hmm.
presentation just blew my mind. I then read The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success, which for anyone listening, it's a tiny book, but a very powerful book. And just kept reading everything from nutrition to mindset to spiritual books. And then I then was like, well, I'm really interested in nutrition. So I did a course in nutritional therapy, kind of dive deeper again, just and always improving my life. And then I
Hmm.
did some personal training qualifications, because I was like, I want to understand, like, can you push yourself too far? Is exercise too much? Had I been over exercising? So I did all of that, brought that piece together. Then I did some training with Ben Greenfield and the Keon, and just he's very much mind, body, and spirit, the whole
Hmm.
thing together. So he was a wonderful mentor. And yeah, I just started then, I was working with clients, started diving into the world of genetics, looking at epigenetics. I'd had a little bit of experience, because before I'd had the children, I was diagnosed with PCOS and insulin resistance. So I was put on
Hmm.
metformin. So I'd kind of already had a little bit of experimentation as a lawyer, of like adjusting my diet to a low carb diet, because metformin for me, I know it's a wonderful drug for many people for kind of longevity. It didn't work. It was actually like, it gave me such horrendous digestive issues
I
I
was gonna
couldn't even
say
eat.
gastrointestinal
Yeah.
distresses. So did you switch to berberine, or did you just keep
At the
plowing through?
time, I didn't. I just kind of went on a lower carb diet,
Yeah.
and I basically, like, I had lots of surgery. Well, one set of surgery that basically removed all the PCOS and endometriosis. And
Hmm.
after that, I was very lucky. I fell pregnant very quickly with my kids. And
Hmm.
I've always followed a kind of paleo, low carby style diet since, and that's kept it at bay. So I'd had that little bit of experience. And then I was just like, wow, that's like, I'm changing my genetic expression, because like there's a really strong family history of diabetes. And I was
Hmm.
like, this simple fix. So then I got into that, did some training on it, and I was working with clients and then getting results. And I was like, actually, do you know what? Maybe I could turn this experience into something different. Maybe it's happened to me so I can help others as much
Hmm.
as I can. I wasn't ready to share what we've talked about. I'm going to be honest. It's been quite difficult to share that for a very long time, because I couldn't ever talk about it. I remember sometimes mums on the school run, they'd say to my friends, I feel like she just ignores me or walks past me. And that was never my intention. It was so hard. Just like, sounds crazy, from running multinational deals to finding it so difficult to face anybody on the school run.
Yeah.
But that's where I'd got to. And I just was fighting this very secret battle, but I wanted it to be a secret. I didn't ever want anyone's sympathy for it. It was my thing that I just had to get through, and I
Hmm.
was going to come out of it. Um, but it was a long process. And, now I've come the other side of it. I have not taken any medication in, I think, 14 months. I was told that,
Wow.
which for me is a big thing, because I was told by the consultant psychiatrist that I should be on it for the rest of my life, because it
Wow.
was very dangerous for me to come off it. And it took me a long time to do it. It was a very gradual process. But now I'm happy to say that, yeah, I don't struggle with that anymore. And my belief is now is it's hard because it's painful when I talk about it, but if it could
Mm.
help somebody in some small way,
Yeah.
then I would feel grateful for it having happened if it can help someone else by me sharing it.
And I'm grateful for you sharing it because there's not that many people first that get on the other side of it and are able to stop the medication, but two, um, to another point is, there's not that many people that want to talk about it because, like you said, a lot of people perceive this as their own battle, and it's through people like yourself that we now realize that it's not just you. It's not just your own battle. It's a battle that other people can help you with. And
Mm,
so, thank you for sharing.
pleasure, pleasure.
So, Angela, you're now working with some elite performers, and you know, people with a time constraint, if you will. What would you say are commonalities among this group in terms of things you just kind of look back or maybe even looking back on your own career and say like, you should do this, younger Angela, or the commonalities that you see among this professional group?
Do you know, it is this kind of free sense to dispense with sleep, which I think is so dangerous. It's
Yeah.
like, do you know, it's like I'm busy, I've got so much to do, then you're always layering in. Yeah. So as we said, in your 20s, you can get away with stuff. And then
Hmm.
suddenly in your 30s, you start adding more things into the mix. And now you've got maybe a couple of kids, plus you're working. And then you just keep adding more. Then they become teenagers, like one of mine is now, and there's more challenges. And sleep is the first thing that people let go of because it's almost like, well, I don't have time, so I can just sort of skimp on that. And actually, what I try and do is encourage people because really it affects your mental and physical health in such a profound way. But
Hmm.
importantly, it also affects your productivity, affects your creativity. And there are some hacks that I use when I'm underslept for sure. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect every night,
Hmm.
but I really massively prioritize and encourage other people to get their sleep right first because I believe it's the foundation.
Hmm. Let's talk about those hacks because I know that there are people listening to this and just looking at like the statistics of it, right? The United States, which is where a lot of the listener base here is, um, has something like an average of less than 6 hours a night for the whole population. Now, the surveys may be flawed, but what are some of the things that people can do if obviously they want to get 7 to 8 hours every night, but if you don't, what can we do?
So I think so. In terms of which question first, in terms of how can they enhance their sleep first, or how
Yeah.
can they, yeah. So I guess the biggest thing for me, I think, is in that I see in people that can't sleep is they're always on. And I think this is so common in the executive and the corporate clients and the
Hmm.
entrepreneurs I see. They just can't switch off because there's always something going on. And it's so ready, right? It's there on your phone all of the time, but they're underestimating how much of an impact that is having on their brain's ability to wind down and actually get that rest. So
Hmm.
sometimes then they'll fall asleep and they're absolutely exhausted, but they wake up in the middle of the night. So bookending the day is it doesn't really matter when you do it. Ideally, you need to create some distance, and it isn't always possible if you're working on something that's going through,
Hmm.
like when I'm working with some clients and they've got private equity deals that they're funding. Um, it's difficult. And maybe that window comes down. It's not like 2, 3 hours, but it's even just 15 minutes or half an hour, but to bookend it so that everything, there's a transition, there's a gear change between you finishing work and what you're doing and everything you're focusing on and now getting ready for sleep. I would say that's a really important thing, and getting that stuff out of your head onto a piece of paper or the notes on your phone can make a massive difference. Even setting an alarm to remind you that you've got to do something the next day, because people carry stuff in their head and they don't realize how much that's impacting their sleep. And
Hmm.
then the second thing is taking the pressure off yourself, because the more that you decide that you need to now sleep, the less likely you are. I think that sleep is like falling in love, right? It just kind of comes upon us. You can't go out looking for love, and you can't go to bed trying to sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like as well, you can't try to have a baby, right? You just will fall pregnant
Mm-hmm.
when it sort of happens. And so with sleep, I find that once you take that pressure off, but you've given yourself the opportunity to rest, often you'll have a deeper sleep. And if you remind yourself that either way, your body is now resting, it will get some regeneration and rest, even if you're not sleeping. But to do that, it has to feel safe. And so this is a really common one with travel, and people aren't traveling as much, is you go into a hotel room and it feels unsafe. It's an unfamiliar environment. You
Mm-hmm.
haven't quite realized it's unsafe, but you're just very switched on and your mind switched on to what's going on. Even just having a sleep mask and blocking out like the smoke detector and the other lights that are in the room, because light, as you know, has such a massive impact,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly makes you feel like you're in your cave and you're safe.
Yeah,
Um, and I like the Manta sleep mask for that because it's
me
so
too.
comfortable,
Me
isn't
too.
it? With the
Yeah, I have the, I
pockets
have
and
I have the
the.
weighted one. It's
Oh,
perfect.
wow. Oh, no, I
Yeah.
haven't tried the weighted one. I just love the fact you can open your eyes because of that padding that's
Mm-hmm.
around it.
Mm-hmm.
So that for me, makes a big difference. But I think once you start with anything in life, once you take the pressure off, then actually things get easier. And then obviously there are various biohacks, and light is a massive one. So wearing
Mm-hmm.
blue blockers and things like that, and using apps on your computer, which your listeners, they're an educated audience, so they probably have heard you talk about before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think then it's like, well, when I'm underslept, there's two things. If I'm underslept, what can I do? And then without just relying on caffeine and pushing
Yeah.
those adrenals too hard. And then also, how can I be so healthy that maybe I don't need as much sleep
Mm-hmm.
as I would do if I was less healthy? Does that make sense? So,
Yeah,
like,
makes sense.
how can you make sure you're detoxifying correctly, make sure those pathways are working? How can you like limit what's coming in terms of toxins and pesticides? How can you support yourself nutritionally? How can you make sure you got the right nutrients to actually enhance melatonin production and sleep as well?
Mm-hmm.
And how can you get really physically and mentally healthy that your body is more inclined to sleep but also needs less sleep? And
Mm-hmm.
then I also look at meditation, and I think we talked about this actually when you came on my show, which was really fun, is that when you're underslept, actually a 15-minute meditation can you put you into a sense of deep rest
Mm-hmm.
that can revive you in a way for longer than caffeine and actually rest your body.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Those are amazing tips, Angela. Let's talk a little bit more about just sort of when somebody comes in to work with you or you go to work with them. What's that experience like? How do you start working with this audience? Because this audience, and I work with a lot of these individuals as well, oftentimes is not open to the idea of either them being wrong or them needing to change something. What take me through just sort of how you work with these individuals in terms of how to open them up so that they're able to talk a little bit more freely.
So I find that I think it's funny because I was chatting about this with Emily Fletcher, who founded Ziva Meditation
Hmm.
a few weeks back on the podcast, is actually coming at it from the performance angle is the easiest way, in a way, to get
Hmm.
those individuals to open up because they buy into the fact that this might improve or will improve their performance. So it's kind of like, like she was saying, how meditation for performance, that's amazing. But then actually, when they get into it, they realize it's way more spiritual and how it's affecting their creativity as well. But there's that spiritual dimension that's more accessible. And so I think I always start with clients, well, where are you now? Where do you want to get to? And how can we bridge that gap and enhance your performance? And when they realize that it's going to have a dramatic impact, then they're much more open to do it. And I think, like anyone, right, the most accessible things are often the things that you can take. So a supplement or a set of blue light blocking glasses, and you can start small, and then you start to really like look at their nutrition, their sleep, and you slowly layer each upon layer and build from there. That's what I find. I don't know about you.
I mean, very similar, right? Like a lot of this crowd has uh, blocks and the obstacles in the way in terms of like sleep, stress, and nutrition. And stress being the one that they tend to not want to acknowledge the most,
Mm.
which is interesting. in itself, but it's always about starting somewhere with that low hanging fruit. And for me, I've found that if you can get the low hanging fruit right and they start to succeed, see the success and how it improves their life, well, that can be almost addictive in a way.
Mm,
And they want to get on board with that. Um, so,
for
Angela,
sure.
you have you have a certain way, I believe, on your website, there's a certain plan by which you work with people. Can you just give us sort of the high level overview of how that plan works?
Yeah, in terms, so I kind of work with people, I guess, in a range of ways. So some
Hmm.
people I will work with one to one if they feel like they want that extra um, kind of very bio individual coaching. And then I also, because I know that not everybody has the time or maybe even has the budget for kind of one-to-one coaching. So
Hmm.
I also run programs where I've put my methodology basically into a kind of 90-day blueprint
Hmm.
for people to optimize their body composition, their energy, and that's all based around their genetics as well. So it teaches them, it's like a really good entry point into biohacking because it teaches them. And I found it's interesting because coming back to your other point there on, I find that most individuals really actually like data. Like
Hmm.
they enjoy seeing the metrics. I don't know if you find this. And
Oh yeah.
so then they realize the importance of it. It's like a lot of people can't, they don't necessarily want to do less exercise because they're really enjoying it. But then when they see their heart rate variability and they find actually, yeah, maybe I am kind of hammering myself a bit too hard on too consistent a basis. If I step it back a little bit, or they've got abdominal fat that they just can't seem to shift, and they start to see the connection that actually that's stress and that's really mucking around with my blood sugar regardless of what I'm eating. The
Hmm.
cortisol's having an effect. When I dial things back and now that actually starts to fall off, they can feel that result. So yeah, as I say, I do have a 90-day program that people can do that teaches them some of this and how to do it and how to understand key parts of their body so that they can start to build a greater compliance with themselves. And it's just, certain things that can help them and give them like the fast track to success and just remove some of the guesswork. And as part of that, I always involve some group coaching so that people can come on to and have questions on a Zoom call. They're kept pretty small and they can
Hmm.
get that coaching alongside. And then if people want one-to-one as well, I do that. And then obviously the corporate presentations as well.
Amazing. Angela, I have a few final questions for you. And these are, you can think of these as kind of fun, rapid fire questions if it's okay.
Okay, sure.
What do you think, or what excites you most about the health world right now?
Empowering people. I always say empowering. I like to empower people to become the CEO of their health. And I think it is a really empowering time to be in. I know this year we've had a really tough year with COVID, and people have feel there's been a lot of fear that's been created as a result of that. But in reality, the market is moving so fast and there's so much coming out in that's so much more affordable than it ever was before to
Yeah,
track and test and self quantify and then really understand that. I think people can really start to take charge of their health. So I think it's really exciting times.
amazing. Top trick for enhancing focus.
I think basically avoiding carbohydrates until later in the day. Get your first get your best work done before you start eating carbs, if you're
Hmm.
going to eat them at all.
Hmm. Um, what is the book that has most impacted your life?
Hmm. There have been a few. So it's funny, I mentioned the seven spiritual laws of success. That's one. The other one is Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's been a few.
Amazing.
Um, I've read so many books. It's hard to like take one out
I
and
know,
say,
right?
I
It's like,
mean, another one that's really impacted me in a big way recently because I discovered that I do carry the APOE4 gene, one copy,
Mhm.
is The End of Alzheimer's by Dr. Dale Bredesen. That's just a
Mhm.
hugely empowering book about how to always kind of keep your cognition.
Yeah.
Um,
And just for people listening, the APO4 gene, or the allele that you're talking
yes.
about. So I guess if you're only one, so you're 3, 4,
Yeah.
or 2, 4. I don't actually know. But so if you're 3, 4, what does that exactly imply? for people?
So basically, most people are APO 3/3, and
Mm-hmm.
that gives them about a 9% risk of ever getting it. So Alzheimer's, unfortunately, most things are, well, everything is, apart from things like Down syndrome would be one example, right? It's in the epigenetics and it's environmental, and it still is with Alzheimer's. It's just that there is a strong genetic component to it. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have 2 copies of APOE3, then your risk is about 9%. If you carry 1/3 and 1/4, it goes up to about 30%. And then if it's 2 copies of APOE4, it's 50% plus. So
Mm-hmm.
it's much higher. But I see that as empowering. I
Yeah.
see that as, well, what can I now do to make sure that I really protect? And that comes back, to all the things that you can do and enhancing that lymphatic drainage and things that happen at night to really keep your cognition alert.
Mm-hmm. And the saturated fat connection, right? And it's
Yeah,
just
as well.
yeah.
Exactly.
So
So
maybe no
important.
butter coffee for Angela, I guess, in the
Yeah,
morning.
I'm not a massive. It's funny, actually. That's one reason I don't drink bulletproof coffee every day, but I
Mm-hmm.
do love butter.
Yeah,
But
yeah, me too. Me too.
but actually, I'm not that big a fan of it in my coffee. The oiliness for me just doesn't work. I love collagen coffee.
Yeah, yeah.
That's nice because slightly creamy.
I'm just like I'm such a coffee fanatic that if I throw butter in it, I just feel like I'm ruining the coffee bean. So,
Mm.
I mean, somebody's going to probably comment on that one. But Angela, where can people find out more about you? This has been so much fun. I'm sure we're going to do it again soon.
I'd love to. It's been really fun. Um, Thank you. So people can find me at angelafosterperformance.com. I'm also pretty active, as you know, on Instagram, which is Angela S. Foster, or the podcast High Performance Health Podcast.
And we'll link to all this in the show notes. Angela, this has been so much fun. Thank you for sharing so much with the audience today.
Thanks so much. It's been my absolute pleasure, Boomer.